Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
Today, we're doing something a little different. We're not looking at a history book, really. We're looking at a user manual.
A user manual.
I think so. And honestly, it's probably the most successful user manual for a complex system ever written.
And this is not just any system. We're talking about the blueprint for the operating system of the United States. We're diving into the Federalist Papers.
Right. 85 essays, written in what can only be described as a frantic, absolute fever dream of productivity.
I mean, the timeline is insane. October 1787 to May 1788.
Barely 8 months. You have Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, John Jay, all writing under a single pseudonym, Publius, to persuade the people of New York to ratify the proposed Constitution.
And I think the biggest mistake that we all make with the Federalist Papers, and I've been guilty of this for years, is thinking of them as these dusty, inevitable historical documents. We look back with 200 years of hindsight and think,
Right.
Oh, of course we have the Constitution. It was destined to be.
And that right there is the crisis in perception. That's the core of it. We see the Constitution as this static text, this sacred document sitting under glass in the National Archives.
A finished product.
A finished product.
Wow.
But when these papers were being written, it was anything but. The text was a proposal. It was, and this is the best analogy I can think of, it was a pitch deck.
A pitch deck for a startup.
A pitch deck for a startup nation that looked like it was about to go bankrupt. Seriously.
That's a powerful way to put it. Because the investors, in this case, the states, were, let's say they were extremely skeptical.
Deeply skeptical. So let's set the scene, because you can't understand the user manual without understanding the broken machine it was meant to replace. It's 1787. What is the actual crisis? Why do they need a whole new operating system?
And things are bad.
Things are catastrophic. The crisis is the total systemic failure of the Articles of Confederation. That was version 1.0, and it was crashing hard.
And we have to remember, the United States at this point, it isn't a nation like we think of it today. The official term was a league of friendship.
A league of friendship.
Yeah.
Which sounds lovely and quaint, but in practice it means nobody is actually in charge.
Right. No CEO, no central authority.
None. You had 13 sovereign states, and they acted like 13 petty, rivalrous countries. They had no common currency that worked. I mean, money from Rhode Island was basically worthless in Connecticut.
So commerce just grinds to a halt.
Completely stagnant. States were actively waging trade wars against each other. They were slapping tariffs on goods coming in from their neighbors. If you wanted to ship a boatload of firewood from New Jersey across the river to New York, you paid a tax.
It sounds less like a country and more like a bickering, dysfunctional homeowners association where every homeowner has their own army.
That is uncomfortably accurate. And that vulnerability, that's the part we often forget. This wasn't just an economic problem, it was a national security nightmare.
Because Europe is watching.
Oh, they're not just watching. European powers, Britain, Spain, France, they are circling like sharks. They are actively waiting for this American experiment to implode so they can swoop in and carve up the continent.
And the central government under the Articles can't do anything about it.
Nothing. It had no power to tax, which means it couldn't pay its Revolutionary War debts, which means it had zero credibility on the world stage, and most importantly, it couldn't fund an army or a navy for national defense.
So you're defenseless.
Utterly. It was a government that could only request things from the states. It was ruled by, as Hamilton puts it so brilliantly in Federalist No. 1, accident and force. Things just happened. Or the biggest guy in the room made them happen.
And the mission of the Federalist Papers, then, was to propose a radical shift away from that.
Precisely. Hamilton lays out the entire thesis for this whole endeavor in the very first paragraph of the very first essay. He poses this profound question. He asks if societies of men are really capable of establishing good government from reflection and choice, or are they forever destined to depend for their political constitutions on accident and force?
Reflection and choice. That's the mission statement.
That is the whole ballgame. Can we, as rational beings, design a system that works, or are we just subject to the whims of history and violence?
And to make their case, they didn't write a philosophical treatise on virtue. They didn't write a book of moral exhortations.
No. They wrote a structural analysis of a machine. They designed a political mechanism that was built to run on human nature as it actually is, with all its greed and ambition and flaws, not as we wish it to be.
So for this deep dive, that's our goal. We're going to pop the hood on that machine. We're going to examine the mechanics. We'll look at the system design, the incentives that make the gears turn, and the outcomes it's engineered to produce.
And we have to start with the most audacious design shift of all, the sheer size of the machine.
Right. Section 1, the Extended Republic.
This is the core argument of Federalist number 10, James Madison. And if you read only one of the essays, this is probably the one.
It's the most famous for a reason, because it tackles the fundamental problem of any government by the people. Factions.
Faction. It's a word we throw around constantly today, but we need to be really clear about what Madison meant by it.
He wasn't just talking about political parties.
No, it's much broader and more dangerous than that. He's very precise. He defines a faction as any number of citizens, it doesn't matter if it's a majority or a minority, who are united and activated by some common impulse of passion or of interest that is adverse to the rights of other citizens or to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community.
So it could be a special interest group, like a lobby, or it could be a populist mob.
It could be either. It could be a religious sect that wants to impose its theology on everyone. It could be a class of debtors who want to pass laws to cancel all their debts and ruin the creditors. It's any group that wants to rig the system for its own benefit at the expense of everyone else.
And the conventional wisdom at the time, the accepted political science from guys like Montesquieu, was that you can only have a republic, a democracy, in a very small territory.
Absolutely. The classical ideal was the city-state, ancient Athens, Rome, before it became a huge, sprawling empire.
The idea being that for a democracy to work, you need a high degree of social trust and very low friction.
You need homogeneity, a small community where everyone basically thinks alike, shares the same values, knows everyone else. The theory was if you get too big, you introduce too many competing interests, and the whole thing just flies apart.
But Madison, in Federalist 10, just completely flips that on its head. He makes a stunning, counterintuitive argument that a larger territory is actually safer for liberty.
This is the genius of what he calls the extended sphere. It's a complete paradigm shift. Madison looks at those small, supposedly ideal republics of history, those little city-states in Greece and Italy, and he says they were miserable.
Not exactly bastions of stability.
No, they were turbulent, they were unjust, they were incredibly short-lived, and they were violent. And he asks, why? Why did they always fail?
And the answer is faction.
The answer is faction, because in a small society, it is dangerously easy for a single faction to grow until it becomes a majority.
The transaction costs of organizing are low.
Exactly. The latency of communication is basically zero. If there are only 100 of us in a room and 51 of us decide we want to seize the property of the other 49, we can coordinate that over lunch. We can form a mob and execute that plan by dinner. There's no buffer.
So in a small state, the tyranny of the majority isn't some abstract theoretical risk.
It's a mathematical certainty. It will happen. Sooner or later, a majority faction will form and it will oppress the minority.
Okay, so if small democracy equals tyranny, what's Madison's design change?
Well, first, you move from a pure democracy, where every citizen votes on every single law, which is only possible in a tiny town, to a republic, where you elect representatives to make decisions for you.
Standard stuff.
Standard stuff. But then, here's the big move. You make that republic huge. You extend the sphere.
How does making it bigger solve the problem? Intuitively, it feels like you're just adding more angry people to the pile. It should be more chaotic.
It's a game of probabilities and dilution. Madison argues that you have two options for dealing with faction. You can either remove its causes or you can control its effects.
Okay, so how do you remove the causes?
Well, Madison says the causes of faction are sown in the nature of man. We have different abilities, so we acquire different amounts of property. We have different opinions about religion, about government. We have attachments to different leaders. To remove these causes, you would have to do one of two things.
Which are?
You'd either have to destroy liberty, you can't have factions if everyone is a slave to a dictator, or you'd have to give every single citizen the exact same opinions, passions, and interests.
Both are impossible, or at least horrible.
One is unwise, the other is impracticable. And that's when he delivers that incredible line. Liberty is to faction what air is to fire.
An ailment without which it instantly expire.
Exactly. You can't get rid of the air without killing the organism you're trying to save. So if you can't control the causes,
You have to control the effects.
Yeah.
And that's where the scale to size comes in.
That's where it comes in. By extending the sphere over a huge territory like the United States, you take in a far greater variety of parties and interests. You are, in effect, flooding the zone with competing factions.
So no single group can easily take over.
It makes it much, much harder for any one faction to discover its own strength and act in unison to oppress others.
Okay, so let's walk through an example. Let's say you have a radical faction that wants to, I don't know, establish a state religion.
Great example. In a small state like Rhode Island, maybe they could succeed. They could capture the local legislature and pass their laws.
But can they take over the entire United States?
Highly unlikely. Because the moment they try to scale that project nationally, they run headfirst into the Congregationalists in Massachusetts, the Quakers in Pennsylvania, the Anglicans in Virginia, the Baptists in the South.
All these other factions.
The system is designed to make these factions crash into each other. It's like noise cancellation technology for politics. You use competing sound waves to flighten the amplitude. You dilute the power of any one group by forcing it to compete and compromise with dozens of others.
So the outcome of the system isn't that everyone agrees. It's not about creating harmony.
Not at all. The outcome is that it becomes incredibly difficult for anyone to agree enough to form a stable, oppressive majority. Stability is achieved not by eliminating conflict, but by engineering so much internal diversity of conflict that no single majority can easily tyrannize the minority.
You're increasing the transaction costs of tyranny.
Perfectly put. You're turning the vice of faction into a virtue of stability.
But there's a second part to this design, isn't there? It's not just the size, it's the mechanism of representation itself. Madison talks about this idea of refining and enlarging the public views.
Yes, this is the filter. The idea is that in a republic, the views of the people are passed through the medium of a chosen body of citizens. Ideally, he hopes, the wisdom of these representatives will allow them to discern the true interest of their country, and they'll be less susceptible to temporary or partial considerations.
It's a bit of an aristocratic hope, isn't it? That the elected officials will be better than the people who elect them.
It is, but Publius is also a realist. He knows that men of factious tempers, of local prejudices, or of sinister designs may, by intrigue, by corruption, or by other means, first obtain the suffrages and then betray the interests of the people. He's not naive about politicians.
So how does the system account for that?
He brings it back to the size argument again. In a large republic, each representative is chosen by a greater number of citizens than in a small one. He argues this makes it harder for unworthy candidates to practice the vicious arts by which elections are too often carried.
You have to appeal to a wider base, so it's harder to just buy off a handful of people or rely on a local reputation.
Right. It's a probabilistic argument. It's not a guarantee, but it makes it less likely that a corrupt or incompetent person can win. The system design is a series of probabilities stacked in favor of stability.
Okay, so the foundational system design is expand the sphere to dilute factions among the populace and use a system of representation to filter and buffer the passions of the mob.
That is the foundation. That's how you control the people.
Right.
But a large territory is only half the battle. You also need an internal structure that prevents the government itself from becoming the most dangerous faction of all.
The one that eats everyone else.
Precisely. And that takes us directly to Section 2, incentive architecture. Or, as I like to think of it, ambition counteracting ambition.
This is Federalist number 51. And if Federalist 10 is the, let's say, the sociology of the Constitution,
then 51 is the psychology. This is where we get into the behavioral economics of the system. This is about how you harness human nature.
and it all starts with what might be the most famous line in American political theory. If men were angels, no government would be necessary.
It tells you everything you need to know about the core premise of the Constitution. It's not a system built on hope or virtue. It's a system built on a deep, abiding skepticism of human nature. It assumes self-interest. It assumes people in power will try to grab more power.
So typically when people think about designing a government or even a company, they focus on finding the good people to run it. They want a philosopher king or a virtuous council of elders.
Right. And Publius basically says, good luck with that. He says, enlightened statesmen will not always be at the helm. You cannot build a durable system that relies on the operator being a good person. That is a catastrophic single point of failure.
You have to build a machine that works, even when, and maybe especially when, the people running it are not angels.
You have to design for failure. You have to design for selfishness. So how do you do that? How do you build a system that uses bad behavior, ambition, rivalry, jealousy to produce a good outcome, which is limited government?
The answer is the separation of powers. But, and this is the critical part that gets missed, It's not just about drawing lines on a piece of paper. It's not just writing down the legislative branch does this and the executive branch does that.
Madison in Federalist 48 calls those mere parchment barriers.
Parchment barriers. I love that phrase.
It's so good because a would-be tyrant doesn't care about a rule written on a piece of parchment. They'll just tear it up. So the system design has to go deeper. It requires giving each branch not just the formal authority, but the constitutional means and, crucially, the personal motives to resist encroachments by the others.
Which brings us to the other famous line. Ambition must be made to counteract ambition. It's always felt a bit cynical to me. It sounds like he's just saying, let's put all the sharks in a tank and hope they eat each other before they eat us.
It is cynical, or rather, it's hyper-realistic. Publius is saying that instead of trying to stamp out ambition, which is impossible, you have to harness it. You have to channel that powerful, reliable human drive of self-interest. You have to couple the interest of the man with the constitutional rights of the place.
Okay, break that down. Couple the interest of the man with the constitutional rights of the place. What does that look like in practice?
Let's take the presidential veto. The president has the power to veto a law passed by Congress. Now, why does a president use that veto when a law infringes on his executive authority?
Not because he's a noble scholar of the Constitution.
Rarely. Is it because he's deeply committed to the abstract philosophical principle of separated powers? Probably not.
It's because he likes his power. He doesn't want Congress telling him what to do. He doesn't want to be seen as weak.
Exactly. It's ego. It's vanity. It's the desire to preserve his own power and prestige. He defends the executive branch because it is his turf. He is personally and politically invested in protecting his institution's prerogatives.
So the system is designed to reward a politician for being selfish and turf conscious.
In a very specific way, yes. It aligns his personal ambition with the structural integrity of the Constitution. His desire to protect his own power has the outcome of protecting the separation of powers for the public good. He does the right thing for the wrong, or at least for the selfish reason.
It's a three-way tug of war. The president pulls, Congress pulls, the courts pull.
Constantly. And the purpose of the game isn't for one of them to win. The purpose is the tension itself. That tension creates a dynamic equilibrium that prevents any one branch from becoming all-powerful.
And this explains so much about modern politics. It explains why we see gridlock as a feature, not a bug.
Absolutely. We complain all the time that nothing gets done in Washington. And Publius would look at that and say, good, it's working.
The whole point is to make it hard.
The difficulty of passing laws is entirely intentional. It's a cooling mechanism designed to prevent sudden and violent passions from being written into law overnight. You want the government to be slow and deliberative. You want it to be obliged to control itself before it tries to control the people.
So if you want to pass a major law, you have to run this incredible gauntlet. You have to get a majority in the Senate, which are designed to be different kinds of bodies, and then you have to get the president to sign it.
Which means you need a broad, durable consensus. You can't just have 51% of the people get angry about something on a Tuesday and fundamentally change the fabric of society by Wednesday morning. The friction in the system is the primary safety feature.
Okay, so we've got the extended republic to manage factions among the people, and we have ambition, counteracting ambition to manage the government officials. But the country doesn't exist in a vacuum. What about the rest of the world?
No, it doesn't. And this brings us to a part of the Federalist that often gets less attention, but was absolutely critical to making the sale. Section 3. The narrative and legitimization layer, or union as security.
This is really Hamilton's wheelhouse, isn't it? Federalist Papers 6, 8, 11, and so on.
Yes. Hamilton is the hard-nosed realist in this trio. He's constantly focused on the geopolitical reality of their situation. Remember, the crisis in perception is that the states think they are sovereign and strong, but in reality they are weak and vulnerable. Hamilton's job is to make them see that a strong union is the only path to survival.
He paints this grand vision of a great American system.
That's in Federalist number 11. It's an incredibly bold vision for the time. He's looking across the Atlantic and seeing a Europe that dominates the world through its navies and its commercial power. And he says, we can be a counterweight to that. We can dictate the terms of the relationship between the old world and the new.
But only if we act as one.
Only if we are united. And this gets to the core incentives. Why should a powerful state like New York or Virginia voluntarily give up some of its precious sovereignty to this new, untested central government?
The incentive is fear.
Pure and simple. It is fear of external domination. Hamilton's essays are filled with these stark warnings. He says, let Americans disdain to be the instruments of European greatness. He argues that if the states remain separate or in small confederacies, they will be played off against each other by the great powers of Europe.
Britain will make an alliance with the northern states. Spain will ally with the southern ones.
And you'll have European proxy wars fought on American soil. The states will become pawns in their game. And there's a huge commercial incentive tied to this as well.
Right. Trade.
A unified navy to protect shipping. A unified trade policy. If you have 13 different states with 13 different trade policies, Europe can pick you apart. They can offer a better deal to one state to punish another. But if you have one single massive market with one foreign policy,
You have leverage.
you have immense leverage. It's the difference between a single worker trying to negotiate a salary and an entire union bargaining for a contract. Unity creates power.
But there's an even darker, more subtle warning in Federalist number 8 about what happens without a union. And this, to me, is one of the most brilliant arguments in the entire collection because it flips the liberty argument on its head.
It is the most sophisticated and, I think, most compelling argument for the Union. Hamilton looks at the map of Europe, a continent of small, rival states, and he sees one thing: constant war.
They were always fighting over territory, trade, religion, royal succession.
Always. And Hamilton says, if we break apart into 13 separate states or 2 or 3 smaller confederacies, we will become America's Europe. We will inevitably fight each other over western lands, over river navigation, over trade disputes.
And if you're constantly at war with your neighbors,
You need standing armies to defend your borders. Pennsylvania will need a permanent army to defend its border with New York. Virginia will need to build forts to defend against North Carolina.
and a standing army in the 18th century Republican worldview is the absolute death of liberty.
It's the ultimate boogeyman. A permanent professional army strengthens the hand of the executive. It leads to higher taxes. It erodes civil liberties. It puts the military at the center of political life. So Hamilton's killer argument is this: if you truly value your liberty, you need the Union.
That reframes the entire debate. The anti-federalists were shouting from the rooftops, this new central government is a threat to our liberty.
And Hamilton's response is, no, you have it backwards. Weakness is the real threat to liberty. Disunion will lead to interstate war. Interstate war will lead to standing armies, and standing armies will lead to the very tyranny you fear.
So he legitimizes this powerful new government by framing it not as a threat to liberty, but as its essential guardian. He's telling them that the price of radical local sovereignty is inescapable militarization.
It's a masterful piece of political persuasion. And there's another clever bit of legitimization they use, this one from Madison in Federalist 39, where he tackles the very definition of the government.
The whole federal versus national debate.
Yes, this was a huge sticking point. The anti-federalists were screaming, this isn't a federal government which is a league of states. This is a consolidated national government that will swallow the states whole.
And Madison's answer is basically, well, it's both.
He calls it a compound republic.
Huh.
And he breaks it down piece by piece to show how it's a hybrid. He says, look at the foundation. The Constitution is ratified by the people, but acting within their separate states. That's a federal act.
Okay.
Now look at the legislature. The House of Representatives gets its members based on population. The representatives vote as individuals. That's a national feature. But the Senate gets 2 members from each state, regardless of size. The states are represented as co-equal political bodies. That's a federal feature.
And the executive power.
A mix. The Electoral College, which chooses the president, is a state-based federal system. But the power of the executive, once in office, operates on the whole nation. The laws the government makes apply to individuals, not states. That's national.
So it's not one or the other. It's a hybrid system.
It's a hybrid. And that was a crucial rhetorical move. It allowed them to sell the plan to everyone. They could tell the populace, look, you have a direct voice. This is a national government of the people in the House. And they could tell the state sovereignty advocates, look, the states are protected. They have an equal voice in the Senate. This is a federal compact. It legitimizes the structure by being 2 things at once.
Okay, so we have the grand philosophy, the internal checks and balances, and the narrative of external security. Now let's get into the nuts and bolts. Section 4. The operational mechanisms. How does this machine actually run? What are the gears?
The single biggest shift in operations, the API change, if we want to use a tech analogy, is who the government acts upon.
Right. We touched on this. Under the Articles of Confederation, the central government could only act on the states. If it needed money for, say, the Army, it would send a request to the legislature in New York and say, your share is X amount. Please send money. And New York could, and often did, just say no, or send half, or just ignore the letter.
Exactly. And what could the central government do? You can't throw the state of New York in jail. You can't seize its assets without starting a civil war. The system was unenforceable.
So the new system bypasses the states.
It bypasses them completely for its core functions. The new federal government is designed to act directly on individuals. If the government passes a tax, it's not asking the state of Pennsylvania to collect it. It sends a federal tax collector to collect the tax from you, the citizen.
And if you don't pay,
Then the federal government can take you to federal court and ultimately put you in jail. That creates a direct, enforceable line of authority. It's a seismic shift in power.
let's talk about the judiciary. This is Federalist number 78, Hamilton again. He famously calls it the least dangerous branch.
Which is always a little jarring to read today, given how powerful the Supreme Court has become. But his logic, based on the design parameters of 1787, is perfectly sound.
What's his reasoning?
He says the executive branch holds the sword of the community. It commands the military and law enforcement. The legislative branch commands the purse. It controls all the money. The judiciary, by contrast, has no influence over either the sword or the purse.
He has a great line, it has neither force nor will, but merely judgment.
Right. It can't raise armies, it can't appropriate money, it can't even enforce its own decisions. It relies entirely on the executive branch to carry out its judgments.
So if it's so weak, what is its actual function in the machine? Why is it even there?
Its primary function is judicial review. It is designed to be, in his words, an intermediate body between the people and the legislature.
Wait, that sounds strange. Isn't the legislature supposed to be the voice of the people? Why do the people need protection from their own representatives?
This is a crucial distinction. The legislature represents the temporary will of the people. The Constitution represents the permanent will of the people. It's the higher law that the people themselves established. If the temporary agents in Congress pass a law that violates the permanent will embodied in the Constitution, the courts have a duty to strike that law down.
The courts are the guardians of the Constitution.
They are the guardians of the permanent will against the fleeting passions of the majority. And to do that job, they need to be independent. Which brings us to their core incentive structure.
Lifetime tenure. During good behavior.
This is the absolute key to the whole design. If judges had to be reelected every few years, or if they could be fired by the president or Congress for making an unpopular decision, they would inevitably bend to the political winds. They would rule based on what's popular, not what's constitutional.
So you insulate them from public opinion. You put them in a bubble so they can make the hard, unpopular calls.
You make them independent so they can serve as the brakes on the system. It's yet another check against those sudden and violent passions of the majority that Madison was so worried about.
And on the other side of the power equation, we have the power of the purse, which is vested in the legislature. This is Federalist 58.
This is the ultimate check that the legislature, particularly the House of Representatives, holds over the other two branches. They control the money. Madison argues this power is so great that it creates a complete and effectual weapon that will ultimately make the House the dominant branch.
If the president starts acting like a king, the House can just cut off all funding for his projects.
Or for the entire executive branch, if they want to play hardball. If the Senate is being obstructionist, you can try to starve the government until they cooperate. It's a very blunt, powerful instrument, and it ensures that the branch that is closest to the people and most frequently elected the House has the final say on the allocation of all national resources.
Okay, so we have all these gears and levers. Now let's talk about how the system is designed to correct itself when things go wrong. Section 5, feedback loops and preventing the vortex.
You know, it's interesting. When we think of tyranny today, we usually think of a single executive figure, a dictator.
A president for life.
Right. But in 1787, fresh off a revolution against a king, their biggest fear was actually the legislature.
Really? Why?
Madison warns about this explicitly in Federalist number 48. He calls it the legislative vortex. He argues that in a Republican form of government, the legislative authority is necessarily predominant. It feels like it is the people's voice, so it's imbued with this intrepid confidence in its own power. It naturally tries to draw all power into its impetuous vortex.
It's the branch that's most likely to overstep its bounds.
By far. He says the other two branches are simpler in their nature, with clearly defined limits. The legislature's powers are more extensive and harder to define, so you need specific feedback loops and internal walls to stop that vortex.
And the most important wall is splitting it in half.
Bicameralism. That's the first and most important check. You create a House of Representatives and a Senate, and you deliberately make them different. Different modes of election, direct for the House, by state legislatures for the Senate originally, different term lengths, 2 years versus 6, different constituencies, different principles of action.
One chamber is supposed to be hot, the other is supposed to be cool.
That's a great way to put it. The House is the gas pedal, reflecting the immediate passions of the people. The Senate is the saucer that cools the hot tea, more deliberative, more stable. And since they both have to agree to pass any law, they are in a constant state of checking each other.
And then on top of that, you give the president the veto.
The executive veto. He calls it a qualified negative. It's another crucial defense mechanism to protect the executive from being swallowed by that legislative vortex.
You know, there's a really interesting debate in Federalist 49 where Madison pushes back against an idea from Thomas Jefferson.
Ah, yes, the occasional appeals to the people.
Right. Jefferson has suggested that whenever 2 of the 3 branches have a major constitutional disagreement, we should just call a special convention and let the people decide the issue directly.
It sounds incredibly democratic on its face, doesn't it? If the government is deadlocked, let the people break the tie.
So why does Madison argue so strongly against it?
For a few reasons, but the most important one is what he calls veneration. He argues that frequent appeals to the people would imply a defect in the government. It would rob the government of that veneration which time bestows on everything, and without which the wisest and freest governments would not possess the requisite stability.
So if you're constantly asking the people to fix the machine, they'll eventually conclude the machine is a piece of junk and stop respecting it.
That's exactly it. And there's a more practical reason, too. If you take every major dispute directly to the public for a vote, the decisions won't be made based on reason or constitutional propriety. They'll be decided by the passions of the moment. The public tranquility would be constantly disturbed.
So the feedback loop has to be internal. You resolve disputes through the courts, or through the check of the next election cycle, or through the veto and override process. You don't reboot the whole operating system every time there's a glitch.
Exactly. That internal process normalizes authority. It teaches the citizens and the politicians that the Constitution is something stable and fixed, not something that's up for grabs in every election. It allows the system to recalibrate through things like staggered elections and census-based reapportionment without breaking the entire machine.
Which brings us to the big question, Section 6. Persistence analysis.
Yeah.
We're still running this operating system almost 240 years later. It's the oldest written charter of government, still in continuous use in the world. Why? Why has it lasted?
Well, the simple answer is that it works, but not because it's perfect or because it created a utopia.
No, Madison is very clear about that. He even quotes the ancient Greek lawmaker Solon in Federalist 38.
It's such a great quote. Solon told the Athenians, "I have not given you the best government, but the best that you would receive."
Or, as Madison rephrases it, the Constitution wasn't the best government possible in the abstract, but the best that was adapted to the views and circumstances of the American people. It's a machine built on compromise.
It is. And its persistence comes from a few key factors. The first is what we were just talking about. It's not based on those parchment barriers. It's based on the active, dynamic interplay of real human interests.
But the bigger factor is probably the coordination benefits.
I think so. Once the states were in the Union, the economic integration, that single continent-wide market with no internal tariffs, became so powerful and so profitable that the cost of leaving became devastating.
The classic example is Rhode Island. They held out. They refused to ratify.
They did. And for a while, the other 11 states just went ahead without them. The new U.S. Congress eventually passed a bill saying, fine, if you want to be an independent country, we'll treat you like one. We are placing tariffs on all goods coming from Rhode Island into the United States.
And their economy was completely dependent on trade with the other states.
Completely. Rhode Island folded almost immediately and ratified the Constitution. The economic glue of the Union is incredibly strong.
And there's also just sheer institutional inertia. The system, by design, is incredibly hard to change.
It is. Amending the Constitution requires massive supermajorities in both Congress and the states. Passing major legislation, as we've discussed, requires the concurrence of the House, the Senate, and the President. This makes wholesale, radical change extremely difficult and costly.
The system has a massive status quo bias. It's built to prefer doing nothing over doing the wrong thing in a fit of passion.
Exactly. Persistence is a feature, not a bug, that's baked into the very architecture of the machine.
Okay, this is the perfect pivot to our next section, Section 7. Interconnection and the crisis in perception. How does misunderstanding this system lead us astray?
This is maybe the most crucial point for anyone listening to understand. You cannot cherry-pick the Constitution.
What do you mean by that?
The modern crisis in perception arises when we treat the Constitution as an a la carte menu. We view it solely as a list of rights or solely as a legal text about liberty, and we forget the other side of the equation.
The energy side.
The energy side. Publius argues this point over and over and over again. You cannot have liberty without energy in government. You cannot have security without a strong central authority.
Hamilton in Federalist 85 literally says, a nation without a national government is an awful spectacle.
It's an awful spectacle. He knew that if you want states' rights, you need a powerful national navy to protect those states from being conquered by Europe. If you want individual liberty, you need strong, centralized courts to enforce your rights against encroachment by a local majority.
The parts all rely on the whole.
They're completely interconnected. Treating states' rights or individual liberty in isolation from national security and commercial competitiveness is to completely misunderstand the system. Fragmenting the analysis destroys the understanding of the architecture.
It's an ecosystem. If you just focus on the rights of the rabbits to eat all the grass they want, and you remove the predators, the energy of the federal government, the rabbits eat everything, and the whole ecosystem collapses and everyone starves.
That's a fantastic analogy. The system requires tension. It is designed to run on the constant, unresolved conflict between the federal principle of state power and the national principle of central power. If one side ever wins completely, the system fails.
Okay, last section. Let's bring this home. Section 8. Present-day implications. We're not in 1787 anymore. How is this 18th century machine holding up in the 21st century?
Well, the core structural tensions are all still there, but the balance of power has definitely shifted in some ways.
Let's start with the executive branch, the presidency.
The modern presidency has a degree of energy that Hamilton could only have dreamed of. You have the vast administrative state, the national security apparatus, the ability to project power globally. The parchment barriers that are supposed to contain it have been, well, they've been severely tested. The system assumes Congress and the courts will aggressively push back.
And what about the legislature? Congress?
The gridlock and polarization we see today are, in many ways, the system functioning exactly as designed. It is supposed to be hard to pass big transformative laws, but you could certainly argue that the nature of modern faction has become so intense, so nationalized, that the intended gridlock has morphed into something closer to paralysis.
That's a really interesting point. Madison's whole theory of the extended republic was that the sheer size of the country would dilute faction. But today, with the internet, with national cable news, with social media,
technology has dramatically shrunk the extended sphere.
All right. A faction in rural Oregon and a faction in South Florida can now coordinate their actions and their outrage instantly. They can act as a single, unified national force. The noise cancellation effect might be failing because the signals of faction are now massively amplified.
That is a profound challenge to the original design, no question.
And the judiciary.
The least dangerous branch has, in many ways, become the final arbiter of almost every major political and cultural conflict in the country. That is a significant shift from the 18th century. But you could also argue that this is what the system prescribed. When the legislature is hopelessly deadlocked by faction, the judiciary steps in as the guardian of the Constitution to resolve disputes.
So to wrap all of this up, we have this intricate, complex machine that is designed to run on conflict. It doesn't promise harmony. It doesn't promise utopia.
No, it promises survival. It's a machine designed to provide, as Madison said, a Republican remedy for the diseases most incident to Republican government.
And I want to leave you with one final thought, something to really chew on. Publius admits in Federalist 57 that all these brilliant checks and balances, all this intricate architecture, ultimately relies on one thing that isn't in the Constitution itself.
What's that?
He says it relies on the vigilant and manly spirit which actuates the people of America.
The software.
Exactly. The Constitution is a hardware. The spirit of the people, their vigilance, their willingness to engage in good faith compromise, their underlying commitment to the rule of law over factional victory, that's the software.
And if the software changes, if the people lose that spirit, can the hardware still function?
That is the question. Can a machine designed for 18th century skeptics who feared power survive in an age of 21st century partisans who crave it?
It's the question that hangs over everything.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind crisis and perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.